Okay. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us to celebrate the end of our fourth cohort of Boston Artists in Residence. I'm Karen Goodfellow, the Director of Public Art for the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. And in that capacity, I am the Director of the Boston Artists in Residence program. I'm joined by our Chief of Arts and Culture, Cara Elliott Ortega, and Sharon Amaguni, the Program Manager of the Boston Artists in Residence program, as well as Victor Young, Golden, Anthony Romero, Pat Falco, and Erin Genia. And city partners, Carol Leone, Wandy Pasquale, Tanya Morales, and Kyron Owens. Tonight, you'll get a chance to see what each of the artists have been working on and ask questions about their experiences over the past 15 months. Boston Artists in Residence, or Boston AIR for short, is a city program where a cohort of artists, from poets to painters to drummers, collaborate with a panel of City of Boston partners over the course of a year. They co-design projects that test new approaches to city policies and processes, and in unique ways, they each demand change. We believe that by listening, responding, and making space for artistic practice and civic outrage, we can begin to change systems that do not serve or support our communities. This program reflects Mayor Janey's commitment to investing in artists and creating opportunities for creative problem solving. We firmly believe that artists are an integral part of our city. This was made even more evident over the past year when artists continue to uplift communities, address inequities, and unite residents in response to the widespread hardships and social isolation caused by the pandemic. By working with a diverse group of artists, organizers, and cultural workers who experience city services from a variety of intersections, we can better understand how local government impacts Bostonians and have a more democratic creation of city policy, process, and practice. By welcoming artists, collaborations, and disruptions, we can begin to reimagine a more equitable city. Now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Sharon Amaguni, whose dedication and generosity led us through these many challenging and wonderful months together.
Thank you, Karen. Hi, everyone. My name is Sharon Amaguni, and I'm the Program Manager for Boston AIR. This year, we had the privilege of having 5 talented artists who have joined us today working with the city. The same week we were meant to meet as a group for the first time in person, the city implemented restrictions on gathering. We had to shift to virtual engagements while grappling with a sense of disorientation and insecurity due to the COVID-19 pandemic. During the year, we saw residency projects in conversation with local and national movements. Projects engaged topics like the COVID-19 pandemic, housing equity, public art and monuments, and mental health awareness, and advocated for historically neglected communities like the trans and non-binary community and Indigenous communities. Overall, there was a push in all the projects for more transparency and accountability in city services. At the core, these projects are expression of civic outrage at systemic inequities and cultural and municipal failings. We're grateful for the ways this cohort showed up for one another and supported vulnerable communities throughout COVID-19. We're excited to be able to share their projects with you today and encourage you all to continue engaging with these artists, these departments, and the work beyond this night. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the evening, who will be guiding us through the event, someone who is disrupting systems for civic good in their own field, Crissela Guerra. Crissela Guerra is an award-winning journalist and senior arts and culture reporter for WBUR's The Artery. She worked nearly 4 years at the Boston Globe, beginning in the features department, and then making her way back to Metro. She's covered the COVID pandemic, blizzards, immigration policy, the aftermath of Hurricane Maria on the mainland, and now arts and culture news around New England. She began her journalism career in Florida, logging nearly 7 years at the News Press. In 2014, she was a part of a team that won a regional and national Edward R. Moore Award for her 2-day series called A Spark of Hope. She also volunteers her time with Girls Inc. as a mentor, and in 2019, Amplify Latinx nominated her as one of their 2019 Latino leaders. She's driven to understand people, committed to local communities, and hopes to use the arts as a lens to delve deeper into issues of race, equity, and social justice. Help me in welcoming Crissela Guerra.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. That bio must be much, much shorter. I have to shorten it a lot. I'm honored to be here and talk about these artists, ask them questions about their work and practice. And first up, we're going to hear from Victor Young, who worked alongside the Boston Public Health Commission Violence Intervention and Prevention Program.
Beautiful. Thanks, Crissela. Thanks, everyone, for having me. I'm delighted and honored to be here. I'm a queer Chinese American writer and organizer, and I wanted to start today by speaking a little bit as an Asian American. This year I've been reflecting a lot on what kind of suffering is legible to the American people, to the press, to the public consciousness. Reading reports of older Asian people being beat up on the streets, the 6 Asian women who died at the spas in Greater Atlanta. I read the news and I think about how this is racism, yes, and at the same time, that racism is more than the body counts of people of color assaulted and gunned and murdered. Racism, I believe, is more than visible injury or reported death. Racism is, I think, most alive in the stories we do not tell, or more accurately, in the stories we do not hear. A selective listening. So this is why I do the practice I do. I write, I tell queer Asian American stories. I write about queer Asian men who have livers and libidos and hearts. I write about people like my parents who are not only housekeepers or scientists or model minorities, but as full-blooded people with flaws and dashed hopes, big dreams and big hearts. I'm also an organizer. I've worked in racial and immigrant justice for the past 10 years, largely in Boston, creating spaces where people tell stories with our words, with our hips, with construction paper and scissors. And this year, in the pandemic over Zoom, I've had the honor of working with the young people of VIP, the Violence Intervention and Prevention Program at the Boston Public Health Commission with Tanya Morales. I really love working with young people for many of the same reasons I love writing fiction. It's about the mining of the emotional truth of things. And I find honesty and openness, a rawness and vulnerability that comes during the time of youth when so much of your life is ahead of you, when your body's changing and you haven't had to get a 9-to-5 job and put on a certain face to become a worker under capitalism. And at the same time, there's a certain kind of silence about you. Adults run your life, teachers tell you what to do, parents order you around. And in pandemic, we've seen a lot of coverage about isolation, about young people being trapped in their rooms, of being victims. But I didn't believe that was the whole story, that wasn't the whole story that we could tell. So I began meeting with this group of VIP youth. For the first 6 months, we did nothing but tell stories. We talked about the lives we lived, the lives we want to live, the things we want to change. The issue of mental health came up again and again, and together we learned about campaign strategy. We decided that we wanted to change things at the school that most of them attended, Boston Latin Academy. And we created an initiative, a campaign called Health Comes First. At Health Comes First, we believe that young people can change how schools address mental health. A year after we first began meeting, we achieved a historic win. The young people pushed BLA, Boston Latin Academy, to pass a proposal for a school schedule to put health first. One of the teachers at the school said it was the most significant change in the last 50 years. It will impact the 1,800 plus members of the BLA community, and it is part of a more global effort to ensure that students have time and space and resource for refuge and rest during school week. I don't believe this is new work. It's not the first time this has been done. It's not rocket science, but the process, I believe, is less common than it should be. In our work, it's youth telling the story, youth telling adults. This is what we need, this is what we believe, and this is the culture that we're changing. In the next little bit, I'd like to share via video a bit of reflection on all of this from the young people who led this campaign. If we can go to the next slide, thank you.
Here at Health Comes First, we advocate to add a student support and a student choice block every week starting the next school year. Students have reported having an overwhelming amount of homework and stress, which can threaten their health, wellness, and education.
I did work and I wouldn't get home from work until like 8:30, and then I had to eat and like do homework until like 1 or 2 in the morning, and then I would have to wake up at 5 in the morning, and I wasn't sleeping very much.
I think that what I love most about this campaign is more kind of it being youth-led, right?
So this is going to be some of our tactics, but it'll be to the tune of Bad Romance by Lady Gaga.
I appreciate how like driven it is by the youth themselves. Like I think sometimes in other organizations, there's a lot of adultism happening where like adults will make you think you have creative choices or financial say over what project you're doing. And it's not really necessarily true, but like I feel like in VIP, you know, the adults overall trust us to make decisions.
Like so far, like what is one lesson that you've learned or one theme that you feel like constantly comes up during your time with VIP?
To really emphasize how we as youth can initiate campaigns, projects that can really empower the individuals around us.
That you're doing something with meaning and purpose.
We have done so much already, and honestly, I cannot be more proud of everything that VIP Air and VIP has done just overall to like make this happen.
Working with others can help you understand your worth and your importance, and that you can make a difference.
Here help.
Thanks, Christina and Veronica, for all your hard work on that video, and to Josiah, who interviewed a lot of people for that footage. And all of the shots were taken before we won our campaign in April. So I'll turn it over to someone I've had the great privilege and luck to work with this year, Tanya, to share some of her reflections.
Hi, thank you, Victor, for that. That was just so beautiful. I actually teared up a little bit, got a little emotional. I just want to say really quickly, I have been wanting to get involved since I heard several years ago about the artist in residence process. I've been wanting to figure out how we could get an artist in residence, and I never found out about the process until after the new artists were announced. And so like part of me was bummed about that, but I really also feel like it was divine intervention that held off, not only so we could get matched with Victor, but also that we could get matched with Victor in this moment, because he was such a godsend for so many reasons, even predating COVID. We were just in a time of influx of our youth program manager had left and we hadn't quite brought on the new one yet. And then COVID hit, and then we had all these young people who were like not going to school anymore, and they were trying to figure out how they're engaging, and like just everything was changing so much. And not only did Victor provide like programming, but I think through his storytelling in particular, these young people were going through so much. Sorry, I'm gonna tear up. They were just going through so much. And my daughter was like among, not the group that we worked with, but you know, she's a high school student and she was having her own mental health issues with this. And to just be in this space with them when I wasn't always in the space, obviously, but to just see what he was creating and what this program was creating for these young people, to give them the space to express what they were feeling, because they were suddenly just kind of out there. And so many of the systems that they had, including even their friend groups, because a lot of them couldn't even go out and hang out with their friends. And so I just want to share that, like, that was just it was so critical, and it kept our young people not only going, but thriving and growing. And they have stepped into themselves in such beautiful ways that they will carry with them for life. And then just really quickly to just say too, just being part of this whole cohort, I've been working with the City of Boston through the Public Health Commission for a little over 10 years. And my interaction with this program and with the Mayor's Office for Arts and Culture has been like the most amazing experience of people who are really doing everything in their power to walk their talk around equity and social justice and racial justice and everything like that. So So I just want to say that in terms of what an amazing experience this has been. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Tanya. I feel emotional too watching the video and hear you speak, and I just want to echo so much of what you said, and so appreciate all the trust and openness and wisdom that you've given me. You talk about it being a critical time for VIP and for the youth, and I believe all of us are in this work because it makes us feel alive too, and this year has been difficult for many people, including myself, and I talk about this work being such a grounding force for me over the past year, and just want to say thanks so much to you, Tanya, to all the young people we have the honor of working with, to Giraldi, to our artist cohort, the mentors of the Artist in Residence program, Christina, Veronica, and especially Karen and Sharon. I also just wanted to add before I close that our work in this campaign is just beginning with VIP and at Boston Land Academy, and we're trying to get $100,000 of funding to continue this work through the next academic year. If people in the audience happen to have connections to funders in New England or otherwise and want to be in touch with me or want to donate through a crowdfunding sourcing scenario, I'm going to just paste my PayPal, Venmo, and also email information if anyone wants to get in touch. So thank you all so much. I'm incredibly honored and excited for the rest of the evening.
Victor, thank you so much. And I have to say, I think what's remarkable is just how far we've come, and people young people being able to just acknowledge that they have therapists, and there's almost a pride, in acknowledging that they're able to talk to somebody about this stuff as easily as they are. I think more so than I ever necessarily experienced even in college. Like mental illness is so much more open. And I think if we all share the same vulnerabilities, I think people will feel like they have people they can actually speak to about whatever their challenges are. So I think it's remarkable what you did over the last year. Up next, we're hearing from Anthony Romero, who worked alongside the Office for Immigrant Advancement.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be in this space with you all. We have a video that we'll play that explains. I think I'm still absorbing that incredible presentation, Victor. So thank you for kicking us off, and thank you to the whole cohort. I think you all at this point should know how much this experience of being in this various Zoom rooms and one glorious picnic with you all has meant to me. But you all remain an inspiration to me, and I'm grateful for that. And of course to Karen and Sharon as well for facilitating this experience. I think we can go ahead and start with a video, and then Carol and I can follow up afterwards. Boston Housing Support Stations is a coalition-driven project that responds to the enduring housing crisis in Boston by providing housing insecure residents with the technological access and legal knowledge necessary to defend against eviction. Starting in East Boston, a neighborhood with a large immigrant population, we have built physical computer stations at Maverick Landing Community Services to give residents access to essential technology as they fill out rental relief applications, court documents, and the like, as well as an intake system and network of volunteers who offer insight, administrative help, and language support.
The Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture would like to welcome you to the Boston Air podcast, where you can learn about our artists in residence and their collaborations throughout the year with city partners. I'm Veronica Wells, and in today's episode, we'll hear from one of the artists of this year's cohort, Anthony Romero, and his city partner, Carol Leon of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement, Gabriela Cartagena from City Life Vida Urbana, and Rita Lara and Kaylee Aguilar from Maverick Landing Community Services.
Imagine, right, you're going through food security a few times a week. Imagine you don't know if you have a house to be in. Imagine the kind of trauma of that, the kind of pain, the anguish, the fear. And now go online and fill out this 15-page questionnaire. attach A, B, C, D, and E. I mean, you know, that's just impossible. Like these are people and they need help.
And there were many challenges. And I think that that's something that specifically me in my role at the Office for Immigrant Advancement, working with immigrant communities, I was constantly thinking about like how we could work together to make sure that we were supporting the work that we're doing and supporting the communities that we're working with.
And the Housing Defense Station is really important because, you know, through that station, we're also able to provide like stipend work for community members who have faced that financial impact during the pandemic, who've lost hours themselves.
At the start of my residency, during the onset of the pandemic and amidst a swift rearrangement of our social lives, I wrestled with what it meant to be making public art without a public. Over time, this question evolved and reframed itself in relation to the development of Boston housing support stations and the coalition that drives it, such that I began to ask, what if keeping people housed was a public art? If, as its name implies, public art requires a public to make art possible, then our artistic pursuits must include community stabilizing effects. To eschew this responsibility is to be complicit in community destabilizing and displacement. In a recent debriefing meeting with the Boston Air administrative team, I use these questions to frame and narrativize how my thinking and practice has shifted over the 14 months of the residency. As an artist, amongst lawyers, community organizers, advocates, and administrators, the work we are doing through Boston Housing Support Stations is less concerned with questions of aesthetic value or on the symbolic potential of political action, but rather is an exercise in the artful practice of resource redistribution and movement support. To be engaged in this work, the work of rerouting resources, and in supporting the work of movement organizers as well as impacted communities, is itself an artistic endeavor insofar as political work is an imaginative project. Or, as Ta-Nehisi Coates writes, politics without imagination is suicide. Boston Housing Support. So our time is limited, so I won't say much outside of just continuing to extend my gratitude, and in particular to my fellow organizers on the project, Kaylee and Rita from Maverick Landing, who you heard, as well as Gabby, who's an incredible artist and organizer in her own right, and especially to Dan Jackson and Jules Rochelle Sievert of the New Law Lab, which is a legal design laboratory at Northeastern School of Law that have been incredibly committed to the work of housing support and in legal empowerment in communities across Boston. So incredibly grateful to them for their insights and all of the work that we've been able to do together on this project. And of course to Carol, who I'll pass it off to now for a few words.
So I just want to introduce myself again. I am Carol Leon, Programs Manager at the Office for Immigrant Advancement. It was truly a pleasure to be part of the program again. I was part of the Boston Artist in Residence program informally years ago. And I was really excited to be paired with Anthony because I had the pleasure of working and connecting with him through a project in East Boston, even before I knew he was going to be an artist in residence. And I think that one of the most exciting things about working with him that I mentioned in the podcast, which everyone should listen, it's a very exciting episode about how the project came to be, is really just seeing him think outside the box to address issues that were incredibly urgent to the community. And the housing issue, especially to immigrant communities, was and still is and will be an incredibly urgent need. So I think that this is just a project that really thinks outside the box on how to address that issue that the community is facing and figuring out how do we provide resources that are relevant to the community, really to inform them about their rights, right? To inform them about how they shouldn't be really leaving their homes. So I'm grateful to Anthony, to all the partners that worked with him, and really just an incredible shout out to Karen and Sharon and all the team at the Office of Arts and Culture. This was an incredibly challenging year, and you guys made this program so engaging and wonderful. in the middle of a pandemic that nobody was expecting. So I just want to say thank you to all of you and to the cohort and to all the partners that made this possible.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It's funny, I read part of the paper that you sent over, and I'm very interested in one of the questions I have is that you use the phrase, the artful practice of resource distribution. I've never heard that described in that way. So I'm hoping to unpack that once we get to the panel section. So up next, we get to hear from Erin Genia, who worked alongside the Office of Emergency Management.
How do you see monuments and memorials in the public sphere contributing to the public health emergency of racism and affecting the day-to-day lives of Indigenous people in your communities? What work are you doing to combat this or to draw attention to this?
Things are so covered up here, and it has an impact when we go out and we're trying to talk to non-Native people about things and trying to link our struggles together. And the reason is because so many people in this state actually think that we're extinct.
All the way down the walkway was nothing but monuments honoring these colonizers, and they're towering over you. Seeing the letters being kind of carved into the stone, it's like by having to endure that and then also to be erased simultaneously.
When we're looking at public spaces, what is the reverence that is evoked from that? When we are walking the pathways of our ancestors, where are those spots that evoke, my goodness, I need to leave an offering here?
And for us, what it is very important, it is to uncover what it is the history and the networks that actually make possible those monuments and those names to happen, that actually make possible to perpetuate the normalization of white supremacy.
Perhaps space needs to be made in our society to think of Indigenous art as well as having that same sort of weight and importance, both ideologically and materially.
Decolonization, what that means. And so basically what it is it's a concept and practice that Indigenous people and colonized people around the world are using to break free from these cycles of violence, discrimination, and despair that have come about through colonization over hundreds of years. As an artist, as a cultural worker, and a community organizer, I see that the United States it's in a state of cultural emergency. However, I feel like our society does not recognize that widely, or doesn't have a concerted way to deal with it at the level of culture. My experiences of being simultaneously inside of and outside of American culture and hailing from people who have been targeted for destruction by the dominant culture has given me a perspective to see those deep harms that American institutions and systems cause. And I don't believe that those harms should be accepted as inevitable. here today to urge the city to examine the existing arts collection and increase programming and opportunities for Native American artists and culture bearers within the arts and culture landscape of our city. Native American arts and culture is not merely decorative. It represents who we are as peoples. In some ways, I feel that Native people's arts and culture is a modern day battleground of perpetual colonization, where cultural appropriation, ethnic fraud, and the ever expanding lack of access to the land that is the source of our cultures through economic, political, and social means, and increasingly through climate change, continues to threaten our ways of life. Hello, it's really great to be here with everybody. I'm Erin Jinya Imakiapi. My name is Erin Jinya. I am a Dakota person. I'm a member of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate of the Lake Traverse Reservation in South Dakota. And my pronouns are she, her. I currently reside on the traditional homelands of the Massachusetts people and within the territory of the Nipmuc and Wampanoag tribes. I am so honored to be with everybody today to share this virtual space with you. And I just want to begin by expressing my gratitude to everybody who has made this residency possible, especially to the staff of the Mayor's Office of Arts and Cultures, Karen, Sharon, Christina, and Veronica. Thank you for all that you have put into this work. Thank you to my community partners, and thanks to my fellow artists for the incredible commitment that you have to your work and for helping me along the way in so many ways. I also want to give a special shout out and thank you to Chiron Owens for his work with me over the past 15 months. My work centers Dakota philosophies and embodies Dakota cultural frameworks, including Wo Dakota, which is a set of guidelines about how to act in a reciprocal and respectful way in the world. And I'm a community organizer and artist, and in this residency, I've been thinking also a lot about public art and public space and those unique possibilities, but also the ubiquitous difficulties surrounding public art, specifically as a Native artist. And I've been thinking a lot more about the notions of public space as an extension of settler colonization, and that the erasure of Indigenous peoples and our histories and cultures and the supplanting of Western doctrines over them is so present in public space. So I've been advocating for Indigenous artists to do more work in public space because I believe that Indigenous artist interventions can contribute powerfully to the process of healing colonized people and places. So this past year, I've been working with the Office of Emergency Management, and it has just been so intense and so challenging because of the public health emergency of COVID-19 and witnessing the work that the office had to engage with. So I spent a lot of time just kind of watching and researching and learning. And what I observed was that I found that so many of the emergencies that we are facing, whether they're short-term or long-term, they come from systemic cultural practices and beliefs. And that to take the next step to deal with them, we need the kind of effort that emergency management uses to really address problems at their cultural root. And so, I've been thinking about that a lot through this residency, and I just feel that we're looking at the impacts of climate change as they are increasing, are really rooted in the dominant culture's philosophy that views the earth and its systems as resources to extract and profit from, rather than as alive and as systems in their own right that that we as human beings should care for and should be stewards of. And so through this residency, I've been thinking about these interconnected cultural emergencies of climate change, of institutional racism, of economic inequality. And in particular, a field that I work a lot in is Indigenous arts and culture. And I think what goes untalked about, unsaid, is that cultural elements are at the heart of our society, and how we operate at that level guides our actions at personal levels, at community levels, at societal levels. And while those actions can do harm, while they can do good, they can also cause a great deal of harm. And so how can we go about addressing those philosophies and ideologies that do cause harm? So that, that's something that I have I've laid out on the Boston Backup website, which I'll share with you in the chat. Some of the products that I've made through the Cultural Emergency Response Framework are art pieces that include the vest, which you saw in the video, a cultural emergency flag, and cultural emergency kits. And so I decided to do this cultural emergency kit initiative, which is modeled after the traditional Dakota practice of giveaways. And what they are is just, they give little gifts of health, wellness, art, and critical items to those who are on the front lines of our current state of cultural emergency. And so yesterday I delivered the first 10 kits to folks who serve on the Boston Public Schools Division of Equity, Strategy, and Opportunity Gaps, who over the past year have been helping students and staff to continue to be able to go to school and to work. And so I just wanted to do a little bit of a show and tell with you right now. I know I'm running up against my time, but some of the things that are in the kits are things that I've been able to source from Native American producers and stuff, like some wild rice from the Red Lake Nation in Minnesota, this immunity booster spray from Rachel Sayette Healing Therapies. She's a Mohican woman. Tonka Bar, which is a native owned company. Some Rescue Remedy pastilles, which are really good. I also made little journals for people. There are seed packs of Northeast annual and perennial wildflowers to plant. And I also created these cultural emergency whistles out of ceramic. And everything is packed into this pouch that has a Dakota parfleche design on it. So I'll be continuing to distribute those over the next week. And it's really been an honor to learn about people who have gone above and beyond during this time of pandemic to make sure that people's essential and cultural needs are met during this time. Thank you.
Erin, thank you so much. I've been doing some work around just monuments as they're removed. And what I find most interesting is the idea that you have this blank slate. If the grass grows and we're not totally sure it was there, depending on how you contextualize it, what will the symbols look like that we honor on our landscape be in 100 years? How will we replace the white man on horseback with something that maybe actually represents this country the right way? Up next, we have Pat Falco, who worked alongside the Housing Innovation Lab.
Hello. All right, cool. Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit, and I think maybe Wendy will talk if they want to. So I am Pat. I'm an artist, and I had been interested in housing justice stuff before coming into this residency through art and just kind of exploring policy and stuff and seeing where that went. So I was interested in kind of being on the other side of that, I guess, the city side. And so I was excited to work with the iLab. And I don't, oh, there's a video, but maybe you could play the video after because I don't want to look at that. So sorry. I had been the pleasure of working with the iLab and kind of like seeing how they handled responding to a crisis over the past year, and like watching them kind of navigate bureaucracy and just kind of learning about housing from the city side, and like thinking about how that could go into my work later. But I guess one of the main things I focused on, in addition to trying to just help them and whatever, was working with Boston younger people, alumni from the ICA Teens program, to think about engagement and like exploring how engagement could be utilized not just for the kind of standard community meetings that favor like white homeowners who also like are really good at talking out loud, extroverts. So kind of like using art to explore getting them to think about their neighborhood, the way they engage with space and their relationship to the city. And that was culminated in a zine, which is not printed yet, but it's being printed. But I think part of what I learned kind of from working with the iLab is that it's not necessarily about the final product so much as the process, the experimentation. And I felt like there were some cool conversations that we were able to have around that internally. I wrote this like really nice thing, and I'm looking at it, but I can't read it, and I apologize. I'm also sweating a lot. If Wandy, if you want to talk or say anything, you can too. Thank you. Sorry.
Hi everybody. I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Wandy Bashwal. I am the current Housing Innovation Design Fellow with the Mayor's Housing Innovation Lab and also the Boston Society for Architecture. I had the privilege and pleasure of working with Pat for the past few months, and I think that you all might have just experienced the sort of joy that Pat has been able to bring to our team, our small and mighty team. And I think that in this past year, it was truly invaluable to be able to work alongside an artist, but specifically Pat as well, on a number of projects. And we are so appreciative of how flexible and nimble he was able to be, which is so much of the work that we do is required to be as such, from jumping onto supporting the Housing Innovation Lab with the Rental Relief Fund program, as well as a number of other sort of efforts, co-curating a exhibition as well, and then also having the opportunity to really be able to learn from younger people on how they view not just housing, but how they interact with their own neighborhoods as well. So we are truly excited, and it's still such a bittersweet moment. We miss you every day, and we are so glad to be able to be with you, as well as the rest of the cohort here today. I think that this space was one of the spaces that truly helped to ground so much of who we are, but also the work that we do. And I couldn't have asked for a better sort of group of folks to have touch base with on a monthly basis. So thank you, Pat, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And thank all the artists and everyone, Sharon, Karen, and well, it's not like the Oscars, but I just want to thank everyone. They're really great and graceful, and I'm sorry. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Pat Falco. I was the artist in residence for the Mayor's Housing Innovation Lab with the City of Boston this past year and a half. And it was a really great experience to get to work with them and learn from all the work they do, which ultimately led to me making a project that was inspired by the work they do, centered around youth engagement and thinking about different conversations about experimental models of housing. I mean, the context of the year that it took place in was probably the most interesting challenge. So maybe figuring out what an artist's role was during a time when it felt like being an artist was probably not the most useful thing to society. How to find a place for the work I was doing in a way that could be useful.
How do you deal with the immediate housing needs that people are going through, that people like need support on right now, but also how do you create room for the future and for imagining and envisioning what that future looks like? And I think that without, you know, an artist's perspective, it would have looked very different to us as well. And not to mention that we were able to recall the ways that we ourselves are artists, and it was like a constant reminder of being like, right, that there are like parts of ourselves that we also need to remember to like uplift and to really highlight in the work that we do. Having an artist work with the iLab this year, what we've been really appreciative of was the holistic framework of being able to like have partnered up with you and worked with you and alongside you. I think a lot of the times we talk about the joy that you were able to like bring to the space and the delight in such a difficult year. And like part of it might have been intentional, part of it might not have been intentional. But I think that it's one of our sort of like Mayor's Office of Urban Mechanic models, right? Be delightful. And what does that mean? And I think a lot of the times, you know, we think about how to bring delight to external spaces or to other departments or to our partners, but also in terms of art, there were so many moments where, you know, from your own experiences as an artist, you were able to like really reflect on, you know, maybe the sort of like ask very direct questions about how does this impact somebody that might be going through this, right? Or even when we're brainstorming different ideas or different sort of like models to try to test out and experiment, not necessarily as like a housing policy per se, but right as an event or as a sort of like way to tell our story, that there were a lot of like questions and precedents that you were able to like call back on that we didn't know about at all. And I feel like that is like really invaluable because it means that we're not only looking at the things that we typically go to, but that we're also like okay with expanding our framework of thinking.
Hey, Pat, thank you so much. That just was fascinating. I have so many questions, specifically about this, and reimagining housing in general, especially at a time where so many folks are hoping for the next moratorium, you know, like just maintaining just where they are if they're able to pay rent at all. So last but certainly not least, Golden, who worked alongside the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. Hand it to Golden.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Golden. My pronouns are they, them. I'm from Hampton, Virginia, which is on Kecoughtan land, and I'm currently residing in Rosendale, Massachusetts, which is on Massachusetts people land. I'm excited to be here, and thank you to everyone who put this event together. And I feel like the team that's always been there, Christina and Sharon and Karen, y'all been so phenomenal in like the way y'all are moving through this. So thank you so much. And I'll be presenting on Learning How to Live, which is a documentation of Black trans life at the intersections of survival and living in the United States. And this work was created during the pandemic. We can go to the first slide. Thank you so much. This is XYXX. Everyone wants a chunk of flower flesh on their front lawn. Seasoned I walk, and niggas here rioting. I just want to party when I switch. I am a man same suede black as their do-rags. People ask me, boy, and I answer with fists. My friends cry, kill Mo, prying the dirt from children's buckled teeth again. I'm used to metaphor and shame. It never lingers. Some sisters call me kin because I am trash and I know it. We dissect Adam's rib because holding my girl with my dick in my palm means safety, means school children get silent, means church girls playing on pavements with my joy. Uncles at my family gathering will tell you I'm a product of my own hood. I offend those who don't know biology like I do. Cookout mouth and grateful bartering. God gave us language for devil, but did not bother translating the sin. My black ass needed a beaten glutton for blood that saves relentlessly. I got to be gun-ho, sweet to sit at our table unbothered. Everyone wants me to kill my demons because my healing is so important. I soldier here for God and still think about sobbing on Sunday. Study the shunning. Hand me a goblet of my own testicles and ask me if my mom made me this soft. Ask me why I haven't learned to stand outside too long in my own skin. And I will tell you about flowers still souring on my front driveway when it rains, looking like mulch. I still don't know their name. XX. Everyone wants a chunk of fag flesh on their front lawn. Sacrificial I walk, and sissies here rotting. I just want to pass. When I switch, I am a bruise, same suede black as their acrylics. People ask me, girl, and I answer with fatigue. My ancestors cry, kill me, prying the dirt from corpses' buckled teeth, estranged. I'm used to mania and shame. It never leaves. Some sisters call me misogynistic because I am transgender and I know it. We dissect Adam's apples because holding my titties with my dick in my Bible means anarchy, means school children get sliced, means church girls painting on pavements with my jugular. Uncles at my funeral gathering will tell you I am a conductor of my own death. I offend those who don't know God like I do. Cookout mouth and graceless bartering. God gave us language for angel, but did not bother translating the pronouns. My black ass needed a father, glutton for blood that loves relentlessly. I got to be glory whole sweet to sit at our table breathing. Everyone wants me to kill myself because my healing is so ugly. I squatter here for God and still think about suicide on Sunday. Study the celebration. Hand me a goblet of my own piss and ask me if my mom made me this pussy. Ask me why I haven't learned to sit outside too long in my own shit, and I will tell you about sisters still souring on the front sewer when it rains, looking like mirrors. I still don't know their sound. I'm gonna take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. This is from And When They Come For Me, after Safia Echlo and Dinez Smith. Yes, we meant fuck and you. No dawn can change how we remember American in this America. The caged tongues, severed sovereignties, the American assassinations. America, I doubt was ever worth this many grandchildren, this many wars, this many words, this many Americans. Heaven is how I pray, as how I make peace with atrocity with America some days. I pray because my God knows the ceremony of vengeance better than America, knows that Americans cower the same when stars shine back the bodies ravaged on tyranny's topsoil. How dare men think America and say united? Nation reborn when America's soiled roots didn't speak English, when sidewalks are hearses and houses, when police hunt Black Americans standing still. We will never know how American we are until history asks, what was freedom for, America? And we have no choice but to point to Americans and forefathers who only wanted white children out of chains. Americans made America the bomb forever bursting in my window. Flags, a beautiful weapon. Me against America. America, even when you sing bombs bursting in air, I know there is a good Milky Way God, reversed and paralleled. A sweet Orion eye ring to our weird ears, an arrow towards just for Black girls who never got to stay with the same name. We always look good in an ivory skinned summer. In a river wash gown, death is the darkest hour for those who live thinking they don't belong here as a criminal, as a savior, as a skull sibling or an earth return. As a daughter and a dove, I'm never alone, even when I'm in the mouths of sharks, because I'm kin to serpents. We retrieve our supper to shed new shields, almighty worlds, islands of misfit men and menaces. You can have some place and never find my heaven. I am home. In the arms of the armed, I am home. In the mouths of mothers, I am home, and no one is afraid to end. You will always be my subject, Black heaven, Black people, never without wings. And this is the last poem. This is Unionville. I'm fake, because I've been companions with the same good, same dark gum niggas, ravens, dope girls since Pariah and the ADHD prognosis, and somehow think I'm going to escape my hometown anniversary. I'm running away when I know the answer to why I wish more days began, quilted in quotidian quiet, with soliloquies from my mother about how she misses Christmas dinner at Daddy's house, back when we wore family out by darting the dozens. When can we make laughter our dominion again? Must we always decide between a country and our childhood? I deserve to be a daughter, and my grandmother deserves more days where she remembers the German chalk cake recipe better than any Pocomo praise dancer could. My God, my home is north and south, southern and city skull, bone and breast milk from the most marvelous magicians this world had ever called mother. Who is Pocomoke boy? Who is any man who's not held my granny by the back and told her, we are blessed you chose us. Yes, my family, we're pretty, but we're not a picture. We petty shredded our teeth against each other's necks. We rode through sundown kingdoms and tore down school systems. Hell, there's an alternate universe where we killed to set one another free. Golden, because it belongs to my birth, to my pop-pop's morning prayer, to my father and I's soul silence, diaspora doves, do we ever make it back from our origin stories? To the earth where our uncles rest a porch holler away, Unionville, my always North Star, my better Black nebula. I don't know geography nor gender any better than I did in the 90s. Find me here, X757, Y443, singing Jill Scott, living my life like we know my name. If we were born bees, never will we wonder if we needed men tomorrow. Have you ever thought about it? How purpose isn't west or east? How God might be another word for family in the South. Our Black auntie's only synonym for free. In the North, we say seahorses are trans and no one goes hunting for them in the ocean. Lord, my granny cries out every time a bee sees her front porch. I used to be afraid of needles too, but I'm more afraid to die by loneliness and meat. Summer, this is the first year I haven't migrated since 17, and still I have tree branches tucked in my throat. I could make a new house while everyone sleeps. I think I'm a bad, bad birdie. Zzz, zzz. I'm a buzz light years away from a language and a land name. I'm scared to say it. Holding you makes me feel infinite. impossible to gut or gorge. I hope there is a dimension where I believe in standing still with someone's sin and glory. When I die, give my brain to the bottom of a hand-dug flower bed, where the dogwood tree splits the pink until I am root and stem again. Father, Son, I want to be somewhere singing through the wooden door of my name-made house with a maiden name. Ask my mother, we're going on vacations to other worlds within ourselves. I hope you can run. Oh, look, the sun's coming out, Granny. Bees, the chainsaw is still in the shed. Can I carry you to safety? Holding someone makes me feel innocent. Lover, where's direction? Where's the sin? I made it home. Thank you.
Golden, that was magnificent. And snaps. Yeah. I hope everyone's doing this on Zoom and on Facebook Live and wherever else we were listening to this work. Yeah, and there are comments in the chat that you should take a look at. Folks, we're going to transition pretty quickly into the panel and use the time that we have. We're intended to start taking questions at 8:40 from those who are here with us, but honestly, if you have urgent questions, I'd rather you just put it in the chat now, and we can kind of engage and have a conversation together. I have a lot of questions, and ideally we'd get to most of them. My first few are actually not for anyone specific, but I think everybody will have a different kind of answer. And I actually would love, Erin, if you'd be open to being the first to take the question, because I'm really fascinated by the idea of your work with monuments at a time where institutions are receiving funding to reimagine what we memorialize as a nation. And I feel like the closest comparison I've heard, or at least remember historically in my research, is maybe the USSR, where you have graveyards of Stalins and Trotskys, and people just decided, well, we're just going to break these people's heads and throw all this stone in like this plot of land, and hopefully we'll forget all of the damage that was caused by this period of time in history. But what you're trying to address is much more ancient and much farther, I think, especially the larger questions. So do you think change is possible from within an institution?
I think that's the question we're kind of all grappling with. And I just first want to say thank you to Golden as well. That was just amazing and really wonderful to hear your words. So I just wanted to acknowledge that before jumping in. I think it is possible to an extent. I think that the institutions that we rely on for our daily sustenance, the social and political and economic systems that support those institutions, they use philosophies and ideologies. You know, they are built from those ideologies and those philosophies that come from a colonial legacy. And so I think that in order to really address that at the root level, what I've been thinking a lot about over this time in my residency is that we have to address those ideologies and philosophies that we hold so dearly, or maybe not dearly, or maybe we just hold them without even knowing we hold them. And so to me, that is the work that needs to be done at that very deep level. And I think some institutions will never survive that process, but some might, and some certainly can. And it depends on what the will of people coming together want to do, you know, how they choose to approach these issues. You know, these legacies and of colonization that are memorialized in public space they're dinosaurs. They're outdated. They're not serving us. They're harmful. We are facing climate change. I think to me, climate change is the most, like the strongest evidence that that we have, that these philosophies and ideologies don't work, that they're not aligned with the nature of reality, that they're not aligned with the natural world that supports us, that gives us life. And so I'm very interested in that realignment process.
Others want to answer that question, or I can ask another. Are you more optimistic than I am? Because I don't think it's possible. So if someone does believe it's possible, I would love to hear that answer.
I feel like I'm looking at Anthony because I'm like, I'm dead. Yeah, I feel like the change always comes from people, and I feel like people interact with institutions, but I don't think institutions are built or designed to do any type of activism work. Like institutions are designed to run and function and to produce some type of product so they can provide people with money or provide some type of money. So I feel like really when you see disruption, you see people who are not with that, and like they go into these spaces, or they kind of like force institutions to look at that, right? Like when we think about this process, even think about the monuments, like the monuments was brought up by people in the city, and they were kind of like brought up to, it was like held to task, right? And and I feel like that's usually what happens is when people kind of like, there's a pressure around it, and then I feel like you see these institutional responses. Yeah.
That leads us into the next question. Mind you, these were some questions that that your staff actually gave, and they're very good. What does it mean to disrupt systems for civic good? I think some people would feel like those things didn't work together. Victor, do you want to try it?
Damn, okay. I'm still musing on the beauty, inspiration, and energy that everyone's shared today, and just want to echo again the gratitude that I feel for being part of the space. I'm also thinking about Crisella, the question you posed right before, and I think I'm on the pessimist camp in which institutions exist to perpetuate themselves, and part of perpetuating themselves is the status quo. In your question is, now I've completely forgotten your question, disrupting civic, I only remember keywords.
Yeah, so what does it mean to disrupt systems for civic good? So, if the systems are perpetuating, if the institution is perpetuating a certain status quo, what does it mean to disrupt it? How did you disrupt it? And actually, after you're done answering, I have a quote from a blog post you did I'd love to read that's really powerful.
Thanks. The way I understand your question then is, what is organizing? What is grassroots organizing? What is telling the stories? What does it mean to create spaces where people can articulate their present realities and express their future dreams without a sense of shame or stigma or taboo? And how then do we make, as we have in this residency, opportunities for people to then question and challenge those systems? And how can we imagine and fight for solutions that eliminate the shame around the silence? And I think that kind of reframing and storytelling, coupled with then the imagination, action, the art and the policy, the visioning and the organizing is, I think, the very simply put equation, but much more difficultly realized implementation that we need to see.
The line that you wrote, it's a part of a blog, so I would recommend everybody go read the whole thing. But yes, we want fair funding formulas and a living wage and a people's budget. Yes, we want laws to level the playing field because this society has always treated some as lesser than others. But the policies alone are not all that we ultimately want. What we want is the daily experience of dignity, to walk, hold our heads up, and know that when people look us in the eye, they see us as fully human. We want to be seen and we want to be heard. So just sort of food for thought as we get through this conversation. I honestly wish we had 3 more hours. I'd be down if you guys are, because I think this conversation should happen all the time. Pat, will you, if you're open to it, talk to me about what a future decker is, which is a fascinating term. And then beyond that, what is your hope for the future of housing in this nation, knowing that sometimes how we define progress is also how we define gentrification?
Future decker, I believe, is Wandy's original term. No, that's maybe, but I think I'll explain it poorly then. It's just like the 3-decker historically has been like working class housing in Boston, and without going into their full history, that is no longer the case. So the future decker is kind of reimagining how housing similar to that can provide the role of workforce housing. So just like picturing what the future 3-decker is. I don't know if Wendy, you want to say something better, but
Wendy, please, if you want to jump in, feel free.
But no pressure. Also, I didn't mean to put you on the. I just don't. I feel like I'm not describing it as good as you would. But the other question. What was the other question? The future.
Yeah, we've been looking at, like, in the artery specifically, is a story that we keep having trouble getting to. Is you see all these cities being. I mean, I live in Lynn. I can see them from here. There are murals that are going up. Housing is being reimagined. You know, like, my loft was a gay club, and I kind of wish it still was sometimes. You know, like, there are changes. There's so many changes happening in the way that we imagine home, and most of the time, that idea, that dream of home, it's not something that most people can realize. Just owning a home is ridiculously difficult. So mainly talk to, like, you know, what you all were working on in this idea of gentrification versus, like, just, you know, changing neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a huge thing. I have this there's this well, you can't see it, but in the my uncle used to live in the North End, and he was like a housing activist, and there's this article in the Globe, and they're interviewing him, and he says, we don't want to make it too nice or else we can't live here. So I keep that above my thing, because I think artists tend to get on the wrong side of that a lot. So, like, just trying to navigate what that space can be. Like, I mean, this is an amazing group of artists and, like, organizers. I feel like maybe everyone, I don't know, well, I don't want to speak for anyone, but how people identify as artist or organizer or whatever thing. So I mean, again, I know I asked you to say the question, but I feel like I forgot it, but maybe I answered it. So
No, you did, to a point, like this idea that artists are maybe on the wrong side of, like, you can make something real pretty, but, you know, what beauty ends up resulting in is pushing out the folks who already live there. So it's just, I think it's a question of, like, the public arts relationship with neighborhoods like Lynn or Worcester, or, you know, all the other cities we're seeing that are turning into, like, mini Wynwood to a point.
yeah, it's shady.
May I offer some assistance?
Please, please.
Some thoughts. I feel like that's really it, right? Like, you could put up the Absolute Vodka sponsored Pride mural and evict the queer nightclub. You know, like, those are the logics, right? And I think when, you know, very often something which would come up in our cohort meetings is, like, what all of us are trying to do, are trying to create situations in which we don't remain complicit in these systems, right? Where we, like, confront these systems as though they were monuments that need to be torn down or reimagined, you know, or thrown in the river. because they are precisely those things, right? And that there are so many traps that we're run the risk of being ensnared in, of running complicit in Pat's uncle's quote, in making things too nice, and in doing so, suddenly destabilizing all of the people that we're trying to just find ways to include. So when I think of the work that we, so many of us as cohort, we're trying to do is trying to hold both of those things at the same time, right? Like, how do we advocate for those communities that we're committed to, that we love, that we support, in ways that builds substantial resources and change, and ultimately maybe positions the city into a place where we're forcing them to renew a commitment, or to make a commitment that was maybe never there in the first place. That's I think, projects like Golden's or Aaron's or Victor's, or, I think that's a lot of what many of us were trying to wrestle with.
Anthony, my next question was for you, around the artful practice of resource distribution, like I mentioned earlier. Could you speak to what surprised you in the process of doing your work?
It's really one thing that's, I feel like, has been really difficult to make sense of is this experience, because it's so tied, obviously, to the particular set of compounding crises over the last year, most of which are just, which are not new crises, but which were catalyzed or sped up by the larger global pandemic, right? So, and I feel like that for me feels like an important part, right? As Carol mentioned, I had been working to support folks and around housing issues in East Boston for some time, and thinking a lot about this intersection of immigration and housing accessibility and insecurity, because housing in particular is a place where we see multiple struggles coalescing, right? Housing is a public health issue. It's an issue of access. It's an issue of citizenship and legality and illegality and labor and economics and so forth and so on, right? So we see around this one particular issue, all of these things catalyzed. The pandemic just sped all that up. Like, everyone needed to be home, but how are we supposed to be home if most of us don't have a home to access in the first place? That's a question in the Q&A right now. And that affects all of us. So I think, if anything, what I was surprised by was I was surprised at how quickly it felt like we needed to respond. And, which of course there's been an enduring housing crisis, and I think we could think historically of Boston as a space where exclusionary and unequal housing policy and development has been prototyped and then outsourced across the country, right? But that in this particular circumstance, all these things were catalyzed, and they sped up to such an extent that I feel like, really until very recently, we were just struggling to catch up. That's the project we built. We built a project that was just trying to provide services for people who had no access. And I would say that, I'm curious what folks like Golden or Victor think about this too, because I feel like maybe there's something kind of similar in regards to, Golden, I feel like right out the gate, you were like, how do I redistribute some of these funds to people who are also struggling, to people who are also undersupported?
Golden, feel free, please. And then I'll get to one of the questions in the Q&A. But to Anthony's point, someone did say, in need of a home, I have artist housing certification, but can't afford to buy in full or pay multiple rental application fees. Any suggestions? So if anybody actually has some information or resources I think we can provide to Anson, that'd be great.
I mean, yeah, I think that Anthony was talking about like a lot of things that were like things pop up, and like I also think about like Aaron's residency. Like, I feel like from the beginning, I was already doing the organizing work. I was already creating programming for trans people, right? Like, that's something, like, when you saw my name, you knew that I was going to be doing something for other people to get people into space, right? Like, this is not something new. But I felt like, you know, I was like, it was week 2 and it was a pandemic and we were getting these contracts for getting all this money. And while tons of people were out of jobs, like everyone I knew didn't have access to, like all their tours were canceled. And, you know, as a freelance worker, that's literally how you get your money from colleges, and they were not doing any bookings. So it was about a response for that. And I feel like, I mean, like, strangely enough, for me, the hardest, the most surprising part was just like coming into, I was pretty, like, I feel like Erin, we pretty much were pioneering the work that we were doing, right? Like, there wasn't like many people know, I started off with the mayor's office with women's advancement. And then I had switched to the mayor's office of arts and culture because there was a lack of clarity around, you know, what we were there to do. And I feel like this pushing back was because I had already, like, I knew a bunch of trans people in the community because I'm a trans person, right? That wasn't something new to me, but it seemed like everyone else was getting on board, right? And I feel like that was the surprising thing for me because we were in this moment of crisis where we were trying to be first responders. And I kind of had to like jump back 3 years into my, you know, grassroots, you know, organizing to kind of catch people up on things that, you know, they should have known, right? And it really wasn't my responsibility to handhold people and to teach them about my experience, because I feel like it was a partnership. And I said this all the time, it's like we were in cohort together, like a partnership I felt like was you doing half of the work too, to respond to trans people. And, you know, it was, I feel like that was always the most difficult aspect of this residency, was that, you know, to be a grassroots organizer. And I think one of the questions in here is a great question. Like, if we think about this term of like municipalities of like, or like spaces of not being, you know, reformative, what does a program like this do, right? And that's why I think a lot of us were saying abolition last year, correct? Right? That's why a lot of people were coming up and saying that reform is to be passive, right? Like, this is a passive way of doing work for trans people because you're doing it because you're relying on me to bring the community, when it should be the other way around. And you should be coming to me equally ready to get into the fight. Because when people are on the streets, like I say in my poems, there are people who didn't make it out of last year, right? And we're sitting on panels and we're talking about artwork and stuff like that. And I was like, so, but what about the people? What comes first? And I am like many people who know, who organize with me, I'm very much about community first. And I don't care if I have to be on the opposite side of it, because I know who I stand for. And I know that that was something that we all kind of leaned on in this residency. And I'm looking like very much so like Erin, you know, at a point had to kind of be like, well, this is how I introduce myself, and this is how I'm going to name myself, and this is how I'm going to do it, right? And like even Anthony being like, I'm actually going to slow down and make space for rest because we're in a pandemic and I need that, right? And I feel like those are the things that we can do to reform and push back. But as the same, again, that's not changing the system. And that's what kind of like the bell I was ringing, you know, to like the change really, like if we look at it at the end of the day, can I say that anybody's structural, as a trans person, your structural life changed after this residency? I cannot say that. I cannot say that we pushed any paradigm forward. What I can say is that people saw someone who was not going to give up on them and was willing to say, hey, we're gonna set this, all this money aside was for you. All this programming aside was for you, so that you can at least get into the door and talk about what you need to see. And I saw that across the whole cohort. Even Victor with doing like champion that project, like Victor didn't have to do that. Like he was moving leaps and bounds to do that. And like when Tanya was giving that speech, like, you know, I really felt that because it really, we've seen these students come in and grow and blossom. And like, sorry to like jump ahead to that question, but I felt it was really important here. But it's like, you know, we are doing what we can. And I feel like sometimes it can't be just the people of color or the most marginalized people to kind of champion that, because we also are of the community, right? Like I'm also a Black trans person at risk, and people forget that. And I think that that's the things that we all recognize, is that we are a link to community. And you can either be about it or you can sit on the sidelines and we're gonna keep putting band-aids on situations. So, you know, I'm honored to be a part of this cohort who really did push for that and push for the space that they needed. And I'm also grateful for, you know, the staff to ebb and flow within that, right? Like that wasn't easy. And I think that we are all trying to maximize what we can do and also recognize like we're human after all, like we're only one person, you know?
Golden, I think you just said everything. I mean, I think it's the crux, it's the heart, it's the core of the issue. You know, I mean, how much can you accomplish? How much can you succeed in, however way you want to even define that, in a year where you're also immersed in some of the greatest trauma that we as humans could go through, when there's endless loss happening around us. I mean, I knew journalists who were losing people as they were covering this themselves. So, you know, we were all in that, and many of us were home by ourselves, you know, also doing that work. I'm intrigued. You're noting, Aaron, would you speak to some of this, being like piloting this innovative new approach, this cultural emergency concept? Would you just speak to the thoughts, your the way I think I phrased it was just like your mindset when you were trying to like come up with what you wanted to work on, and then like some of the limitations that you found as the pandemic kind of, you know, continued.
Yes, thank you. I think as a Native American person, the city of Boston has had a almost 400-year legacy of hostility towards Native people. And that's not something that is going to be changed by one person or one residency. There's a systemic change that needs to happen, you know, that it needs to be a collective will to address that legacy and to try to make things better. I think during the pandemic, it was very hard to see, especially how Native American people were not even counted, are as a statistic even. We're always sort of in that other category, but yet this is our land. So it's very hard. And then to lose people, it's incalculable. And I think this past year, thinking of what can I do? Because in Dakota culture, each person has a responsibility to existence. What can I do to take whatever energy I have, whatever privileges I've been given, to try to raise awareness, to make things a little bit better for those who will come after me. And so that's like a guiding principle that I have, and that I think we in this cohort and within the mayor's office, the staff who's supporting us have, that everybody cares about that and everybody is interested in moving that forward. So I felt a lot of kinship around that through this work. And I think most importantly, what for me has come from this work is I feel very grateful for being able to take a really good systems level look at how the Office of Emergency Management operates. To now I have that, I understand that, and I can share that. And I think really that we are in a state of cultural emergency. Like we should not continue on the way we have been going. We should all stop right now and say, no, no more. There's too many people who are suffering. There's too many fellow beings on this planet who are suffering. And for what? You know, there's a lot of wasted effort, wasted time, wasted resources. The only way we're going to do that is by coming together. And so I think people who work in community understand that and are actively working towards that. And I think I actually feel that by looking at the state that we're in as an emergency, that there are tools that we can use within our the institutions that can help us. We've put a lot of energy and effort into those already. Like, for example, with, there's this work happening, there's work being done, and there's people who care. So how do we bring those things together? How do we support those efforts, support the people who are doing those things? And I think that's what we need to do. And then I think some of our institutions, at least, can help us do that. I don't think all of our institutions can do that. I think, I think that we need to decide what we need to do moving forward. And I feel in some ways so hopeful because I'm a mom, I have 5 kids, and I have to feel hopeful for them. But, I'm looking at the state of this political polarization that we're facing, the state of our economy, and the fact that we cannot continue to strip every last resource from this planet so that, for whatever personal gratification or even our survival, that there are better ways. And as a Native person, Indigenous people's philosophies have long been targeted for destruction, because I think we bring it up, we say, no, this isn't right. And as we have from the very beginning, when we first came in contact with colonizing philosophies. So what I'm saying isn't new at all. And there's a long line of people who are saying these things, and we need to listen because our very survival is at stake. And I think as a Native American person, being put in a position of my philosophy is now very interesting, because we're in a crisis mode. Now people, after genocide, after assimilation, after the destruction of the land and the people, now people are like, oh, well, help us out. What can we do differently? Well, we need to support people. We need to make sure people's basic needs are met. That's, I think, the most important thing that we have to do right now.
Thank you. I'm curious, Anthony and Victor, would you all be open to talking about rest? Golden mentioned this idea of like rest, and rest to me feels revolutionary at a time where there's this much work to do. So the role that rest played, in the work that you did, and Victor, specifically with you, and like encouraging this holistic idea of taking care of yourself, especially for students who are often under so much pressure, and suddenly they're hurled into this brand new situation. Either of you can go.
All right, Anthony. I mentioned in my presentation how much I love working with young people. And I think a part of it is that as we grow older, and I shared part of this piece with the cohort, but our wires or our sensory neurons become caked with this kind of insulation, this detritus of adulthood that numbs us and makes it harder for us to feel. And for me, the work of being alive and taking in all the colors of the world is being in our bodies and knowing that we can laugh and cry, and responding to stories and hearing them and making them. And art is work and art is rest. And I believe that about organizing. Organizing is grief and suffering and frustration, but also joy and happiness and possibility. And during our sessions together, with the youth, I like the number of games we play, and I taught them like a shoulder massage I learned on YouTube, and like little things that add up. But I think it was very inspiring to be part of this cohort with Golden and Aaron and Pat and Anthony, because I feel like constantly they were reminding me of not always tying self-worth and productivity together, and thinking about what it does mean to rest. And also the staff, Sharon and Karen especially, reminding us of that as well. So thank you all.
I mean, I feel like it was probably y'all that encouraged me to rest. I think that's actually what happened. I think I was like real stressed and very sad. And I was like, in the maelstrom of just grief and like anxiety, but also like feeling uh, committed to the political goals that I wanted to achieve. And if I can, it's funny because just as a reflection over the last year, one thing that I was just reminded of was, there was a moment at the beginning of last summer where folks like Karen Young, who I think is also on this call, so shout out Karen Young, were pulling together groups of artists of color to just like process together. And I remember sitting in those groups maybe uh, right after like a kind of resurgent Black Lives Matter wave of protests in the summer, and thinking that I had a responsibility as a non-Black person of color to show up, to like um, to remain committed to the work of the kind of systemic change. As so many of my Black friends and loved ones were, wrestling with grief and despair and all the things we just mentioned, right? But these are these kinds of waves, to speak to kind of Golden's. That's what's so beautiful, Golden. Just, I know you know this, but I'm just going to say it because we're in public again. So, what's so beautiful and what you're so great at putting into words is just precisely those waves, right? Is like, all of these things are true simultaneously. I maybe just felt like the scale of what I was experiencing on that kind of emotional level, and two, just probably also in terms of my labor, though it's harder to see that kind of labor, that kind of artistic organizing labor, because so much of it is also social. That I felt just these kinds of waves, but it really, I give all credit to the cohort for just encouraging me to like take the space and try to take as many breaths as I could, just to make the work sustainable. Because that's really ultimately the question. We all of us had already been doing this work. It just was extra hard over the last year and a half. And then the real question was like, how do we just keep doing it? How do we not just like burn ourselves out completely and lose all joy for it? Curious if others felt the same, but.
Victor actually asked a fantastic question in the chat. Tanya, Wandy, and Carol, if you want to share and speak on your thoughts on all of this, why we do this work, what is its potential, and how can we be honest about our limitations? I'd love to hear from all of you, especially Wandy, when you mentioned working with Pat was just joy. There was this delight in that. Could you talk about that? And I'd love for Carol, Tanya, Sharon, Karen, anyone to kind of speak to moments of joy that you had throughout the last year and a half, despite how challenging it was.
Yeah, I think that I want to also acknowledge the sort of like tension that I'm currently holding in my body, based off of some of the discussion that has been taking place. And I think that it is a necessary tension. I think that it is not an unknown tension as well, because I think that a lot of the sort of comments that you all had were super intriguing to me, specifically because I think that I have a counter question to some extent, which is, why do any of us come into doing this work, right? Was as artists, what compelled you to sort of think about working with a local municipality or a local government? To the rest of us as city employees, right? What brings us to this work, and what were we curious about? And what were some of the things that really compelled us to doing this as well? I think that the sense of responsibility that Anthony also mentioned is one that is definitely a key question as to why I personally do this work, and recognizing and trying to understand what it means to be a good guest in all senses of the word, based off of whose land we're currently on, but also what it means to be somebody who's not from the U.S., to be living in this nation as well, and the sort of continuous tensions around that as well. I think we should be honest about our limitations on a daily and consistent basis. I think that this cohort specifically had a lot of conversations about what it meant to work with other staff members who perhaps were not in positions of leadership, and what that meant for us, right? Because there is the sort of understanding of the responsibility of how you carry certain aspects of information and how you apply pressure to different parts of our many departments and the overall institution. But then the question still is, what type of power do you hold? And I think that our positionality shifts on a constant basis in the spaces that we're in. And so I think that it is always an interesting place to be. So I'm definitely holding on to that as well. And the sort of aspect around joy and delight, it is a motto. It is a way to sort of to live, right? It is a way to be able to persevere in all that we do, because so often it is not easy. And I think that the more we can recognize that doing this work is not easy, the more we can remind ourselves as to how others are also experiencing and navigating this city. And I think that those reminders are quite necessary so that we can at least try to move in a way that feels right to all of us. And I think I'll pause there.
I can go next. I think that there was a question about, why this program and why do this program if you don't feel like you're really going to make a difference. And I am very much of a positive and like very, like idealistic person. And you would think that, working in an institution that it has a lot of limitations, that I would lose some of that. And thankfully I haven't. So I think that one of the things that I have seen, especially the artists do, is that without you and without the work that you did, you wouldn't push the envelope internally with the work that we do. And I think that you do leave that little mark, like as we say in Spanish, like esa huella, like you leave like a mark in the work that we do as departments. And we grow with your outside of the box thinking and with your creative ideas. I think that, yeah, you may not see because change happens very slowly when it comes to big institutions like city government, but it does make a big difference, right? I think it makes a really big difference for someone to come in and say, you could be doing more on these, right? And I think, for instance, the work that Anthony was doing, and that resource wouldn't be there if he hadn't been part of like this space and this group and this cohort. And same with all the other artists. And I think that I'm just like infinitely grateful for that. And I always see the glass half full. That's just kind of like the person that I am. But I also think that the reason why I work in city government, and I remember telling this to Anthony, maybe to the group at some point, is because I came as an immigrant when I was 16 and my parents did too. And I was thinking, if I don't do this work myself, and if I don't go to city government, and I am not that person that will help people like my parents when they came here, who's going to do it, right? And I think that that's a lot of the responsibility that even these like vicarious trauma that we experience in the work that we do, of not only do we put ourselves in the shoes of people that we're serving, right? Like we're also reliving some of those experiences that we ourselves have lived, which is also what makes us so special for the work that we do. And I think this goes for the whole group, because I saw that in the whole group and I saw that in the artists. So I still think that everyone made a huge difference, and that mark will continue to grow, and that pushing of the envelope, it will just be like, I'm thinking of Venice and how this is a very sad comparison, but little by little, right? Like my dad always says that little by little, like a drop of water can perforate a rock. And I really think that that's like, you're like the drop of water that's like perforating or like even destroying the structures that should be like rebuilt and destroyed and rethought. So those are just my 2 cents around these. But I'm just really grateful to have been part of this program, really, and to all of you.
Yeah, and if I can, I just want to build on some stuff that both Wanda and Carol said. Like, I feel like, where's the joy? And I feel like so often it's so easy, especially, I have to say, even though it could cost me my job, as a city employee, I think sometimes it is so easy to go into that pessimistic role, because almost by definition, as a city employee, we are entrenched in the systemic aspect of the inequity and the injustice and the racism and everything, right? And so it's so easy to be so pessimistic about it, but I also tend to like see things and just build so much hope and like look at the planting of seeds that's happening. And I, I commented to what Golden was saying a while ago about like how were any of us really transformed? And I think like probably in this group, I mean, there's probably different levels of transformation, but it's possible that it wasn't necessarily a transformative experience for folks involved in this, but everybody involved in this planted all these seeds of transformation for other people. And that is where I find the hope and the joy. And being part of this project has just been so, I mean, it's just been so inspirational in terms of like the conversations we've had and the real work that people are doing and the real limits that people are pushing, and I tell people, I have some new staff on my team right now, and we've talked about a couple things. And I talked about how, like, when I started in this position, I used to always say, like, I would see these inequities or these injustices happening even internally. And I would tell my coworker, I'm going to say something about this. And she would laugh at me and say, like, oh, Tanya, it's not going to do any good to say anything. And I was like, maybe it doesn't do any good, but I'm going to name it anyway. And, and I feel like that's kind of like what this group is. This cohort has just, they're not only naming it, they're like putting things into action. Everybody is. And it's just been so amazing. And so I feel like the joy that I have seen, that I feel from being involved in this project is not, it's the hope. And it's the hope not only, I mean, the artists, excuse me, but like, y'all are out there doing this anyway. The artists are doing this all the time anyway. And the hope for me feels like the city is getting involved in this. The quote unquote power structure is getting involved in this. And if we don't have that power structure involved in it, the systemic nature of these issues is not going to change, right? We have to influence those power structures. And I feel like the joy is also that, like, just working with Sharon and Karen and this project has been like, seriously, I said it from the beginning, like no other city engagements that I've had has been like, these folks are walking their talk and they're pushing this. Even just what you entitled this event tonight was just like the power in that, and the language and the words you used, in terms of outrage and like whatever, like, I don't know, I just feel like, to me, there's great hope in that. So blah, 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 blah. But like, this has just been the most amazing experience in my, tenure as a city employee. And I thank you all.
I know we're wrapping up shortly. I'd love to hear final thoughts from folks. Sharon, if you'd like to share, especially kind of, just talking about what the artists are saying and how different this year was in general for Boston Air, and what you accomplished, I think, regardless, in spite of everything.
Yeah, I can speak briefly on that. I think as a city employee, I think, part of me is here because I believe in the work, but also as an immigrant and as a Black woman, there are definitely those understandings of the obstacles and the barriers and, the massive inequities that exist within an institution just by being an institution, like several of the artists said earlier. But in my heart, and as maybe similar to Carol, I think I am an optimist, and I want to believe that, and I do believe that this work really makes impact. And I think we see it, especially this program, as kind of seedlings. Things might not happen immediately right away, but we definitely see these kind of echoes in the work as years pass and as months pass, and artists who continue to work on these kind of projects and the things they started as an air, they continue to work on them in the future and continue to see that grow. And I think that's the part that also really, makes me, and I think Karen as well, feel like this is worth it, because we know that we may not, in the moment when we're in the emails and we're in the meetings and we're in those moments of like barriers and obstacles, it feels foggy. But then we get to moments like this when we get to look at the work and talk about the people, and we get to moments where we get to be in the community and see the way it's impacting people. You get to see the housing support stations, you get to see the confronting climate myths panels and the trans and non-binary town hall and the VIP health comes first youth and all the work they're doing. And that really kind of makes it feel like, okay, I want to get up and keep doing this work, because seeing the way it's impacting these residents, and that really pulls me towards waking up and doing it every day, even though we know that it comes with obstacles. Karen, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I mean, I think you spoke truly. I'll say, yeah, the joy and the love is real. And I think, I don't know if I'm an optimist, but I think I have faith in art and artists and what we can do together as a community. And I believe in fighting with each other and, you know, humbling ourselves when we are failing, and trying to listen. And thank you all. Someone in the chat wrote, I believe it's Victor, Pat equals joy. Pat, final thoughts on just in general, just the project you were doing, the parts that you loved about it. I really enjoyed just reading. I wanted to get more into your work, so I'd love to hear a bit from you.
I think he was joking. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it was a weird year. I feel like it took a while. I mean, it was like amazing to be a part of this, because I think maybe I can't imagine having gone through that process without being part of this cohort, because I just felt like there was times when it was like really didn't make any sense to be an artist. So you're processing like lots of stuff. So I felt like it took a while to like get to the work, and like maybe one of the things that I enjoyed about working with the city was that, like, I think coming in as an artist, I was like focused on like, it has to be a final project that like looks good and like is in public and people, you know, like think it's nice, but you can, like, the process is part of it, and can be more powerful, I guess. I don't really know what I'm saying, but I mean, did that kind of like, I don't know. So
Totally. No, it totally, yes. It was a good answer, truly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Sorry.
I wonder, Golden, do you, I feel like I always end with the poet. I feel like the poet always has the answers anyway. Would you please?
I mean, no, I feel like everyone said amazing things. Like, I want to shout out my friend Zenaida, who helped me do a lot of the collaborative work in like around the city, the trans and non-binary town hall. I want to shout out Ayana from the Mayor's Office for Women's Advancement. She really helped me down this during this time. And I don't know, like, I think the residents, like I can't think of it enough. Like, that's why I do it. Like, I don't know, like, I don't believe in like institutions necessarily. Like, I believe in the people, and that's all I'm gonna ride for from the end of time. And I feel like that's where we always should be looking towards. I feel like the answers are always there. What the work should be, what we should be doing, how we should organize. I feel like that it's already outside our door if we're willing to walk outside of it, if we're willing to be uncomfortable, if we're willing to ask questions, if we're willing to follow up on what we say we're going to do. I feel like that's where the work begins and ends, right? That's the heartbeat of the city. That's the reason why we have government. There will be no government without people. And I feel like we always need to remember that we are of the people, and it's by the people and for the people that we should always stand. That's it.
The poets always have the words. I think it's a good place to wrap it up. Karen, sorry, Sharon.
Yeah, I'm about to pull Karen back in. But I just want to say thank you, of course, first to Priscilla and also the artists and city partners. And we have a more in-depth thank you written out, but just wanted to say thank you for this really thoughtful, really wonderful conversation. I think a lot of us, we continue to think about this throughout the night. And of course, you know, through air, we hold on to all of your words very consistently, and we think about the comments and the feedback, and we appreciate the ways in which our artist partners and city partners are pushing us and pushing the city and are pushing change and work within this work. Karen, you want to hop in here?
Yeah, and as we mark the end of our work together through Boston Air, we want to thank you all for being here tonight, those in the audience and with us, and for being in community in Boston, which is on the traditional homeland of the Massachusetts people. We acknowledge the continuing presence of the Massachusetts as well as the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples. We also recognize the Indigenous peoples represented in the city's residents, in addition to those in the diaspora. And, I also want to thank, all the artists and all the city partners here today, and to thank, Sharon again, and all of you for being in community this year, and the entire Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, especially our colleagues, Christina Mikian, and our former and much missed colleague, Veronica Wells, for your support in documenting the program, which was instrumental in telling these stories. And our Chief of Arts and Culture, Cara Elliott Ortega, for your support and for pushing me to design and lead boldly when I most need it. And lastly, we'll be releasing a call to artists for our 5th cohort of Boston Air in December, and continuing the important work of connecting artists with municipalities. So thank you. Thank you all, and good night. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.